To discuss, we're joined by counterterrorism expert and advisor Gadi Adelman and John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Gadi, let's start with you. Good to have you with us. Gadi, let's start with you. Israel is hosting the Eurovision Song Contest starting May 14th. Prime Minister Netanyahu still putting together his coalition government. So what do you make of the timing of this weekend's attacks?
Well, it's certainly not a surprise. As you just said, both Hamas and Islamic Jihad had threatened just a week ago that they were going to try and disrupt the Eurovision as well as Israel's Independence Day festivities. So the timing is not really surprising. My concern is whether or not it will start again once Eurovision begins between May 14th and 18th.
John, let's have you weigh on that. I mean, obviously, Hamas and Islamic Jihad want to try and deter visitors from coming. As we mentioned, 41 countries competing. This is a huge event for Israel, and they want to ruin this for Israel. But do you anticipate that Hamas and Islamic Jihad or either will actually attack during the Eurovision Song Contest?
Well, that remains to be seen, Michelle. You know, there'll be about 5,000 or so expected visitors from Europe attending the Eurovision contest in Tel Aviv. But I think the real target is the 180 million or so Europeans who'll be watching this and looking to see what is taking place in Israel and whether or not Israel will be forced yet again to defend itself against these types of indiscriminate rocket attacks by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So in some ways, it's kind of like it's maximum leverage by these terrorist organizations against Israel. But I would pull back the veil and really look to see what it is that Major General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, has in mind to distract the United States and Israel from Iranian malfeasance elsewhere in the Middle East.
Do you think that it's a coincidence that there are these threats that the U.S. is responding to, at least by sending over an airship carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, to the region, as well as this intensified violence? Do you think, Gadi, that there is a connection between the ramped-up violence and the threats coming from Iran?
The timing, anytime any terrorist organization or a state sponsor of terror, such as Iran, does anything, is always very important. So there is no doubt that there's a connection there. But John just hit the nail on the head. You know, the Islamic Jihad, they gained more out of this last bout of fighting with Israel than any other group, because now they have a seat at the table. And we need to remember, and what I mean by that is they were part of the negotiations this time, which they had not been, between Israel and Egypt brokering a peace deal with Hamas and Gaza. They got to sit at the table. But we need to remember how this whole last round of fighting started. And it was Islamic Jihad sniping at and hitting two Israeli soldiers on the orders of Iran. So John just hit the nail on the head. He's absolutely right.
So, John, how should Israel be responding to this? Because there's a lot of frustration that Hamas is dictating the rules of this conflict, because it starts a war, or Islamic Jihad start a war, and then they want a ceasefire, and Israel agrees. How should Israel respond?
Well, I think to date, the Israeli government has taken the most responsible perspective, looking to see how we can forestall any further type of military operations. Ideally, if there are no further attacks during the Eurovision contest and everything remains relatively peaceful over the next week or so until after May 18th, I believe, is the end of the Eurovision contest. But I think then Israel has some very difficult decisions to make about the future of Gaza, that it can't leave itself vulnerable to these types of attacks by Hamas, by Islamic Jihad, and effectively by Iran through these proxy terror organizations. And I think that's really going to be the key decision for the new government in making in Israel, and that is how to deal with these terror organizations and whether or not, unfortunately, highly escalated military operations targeting commanders, weapons caches, and maybe beyond that needs to take place in Gaza in the weeks ahead.
John, thank you so much. Appreciate your analysis. Gadi Adelman, appreciate it as well. Thank you to you both.